Liberate IT is an Oracle NetSuite solution provider that has been servicing Australian and New Zealand companies since 2011.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Liberate IT Back to Basics training series. So I am Gabrielle. I'm the relationship manager for Liberate IT. Most of you, I think, have probably talked to me at one point or another. And joining us today, we have Brett Lampart, who I've put him down here as our technical manager, but those of you who've met Brett know that he is all things technical, really, with Liberate IT, and is probably at the moment one of our all-round gurus. Now, just to sort of give you a little bit of an insight, so we are running this Back to Basics training series once a month, and if you want to have a look at the past series, if you pop over to our website and click on the events tab, you'll be able to see the past webinars that we've run. So this webinar, we are recording it, and there will be a copy sent out to you, and please feel free to share the copy of the webinar with as many people as you can. This series it's a wonderful training tool, it's a wonderful refresher tool, and it is there to be used as much as possible. Right, there we go. And I shall let you introduce yourself, and I shall now mute.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Brett, and I'm one of the technical and actually functional consultants at Liberate IT. And I guess today's webinar, I'll be talking about workflows a little bit, but I guess more than just talking about, I'll actually be doing a bit of a training session on how to use them, and I'll do the training session based on some, so I'll show you the agenda of that one. So I'll start with the boring stuff, just the workflows and the introduction of it, what a workflow is, and the elements within a workflow, and then we'll have a look at the demo scenarios, like the use cases that we'll use in this training session, and then in that live demo, that's what we're going to actually do, those demo scenarios and use cases, to have a look at how you could use workflows and for what sort of use cases. And then to finish it all off, we've got a Q&A where any questions that you've asked through the chat, Gabrielle will basically read them out, and I'll be able to answer some of these questions. So to start off, a quick sort of required skills. Don't be scared if you don't have the required skills, you still be able to follow this training session. But ideally, we want you to definitely have sort of a NetSuite basic understanding of what the navigation is in NetSuite, a little bit about the setup of NetSuite and how it all sort of works. And that's the same thing with understanding customizing forms and fields, and what a form looks like, what a field is, how you can disable a field. All these sort of things are relevant for the session. And then the logic concept, understanding what happens when type of thing is important as well, but you'll see that once I go into the demo. And then bonus, if you're building big workflows, experience in business process mapping is definitely a plus in that one, to understand what process, and I guess almost draw it out in a process map, and then make it into a workflow in NetSuite. We probably won't be able to get to that sort of level in this hour training session. But you'll at least get the basics, and maybe you will be able to sort of create your own business process mapping workflow at a later stage. So what is actually a workflow, and when do we use a workflow? So it's an automated business process on a particular record. So it could be on a transaction, could be on any other record, could be on a customer record, could be on a custom record that you've got, but it's to automate a certain process on that particular record. It basically applies a business process to your data entry. So if you're entering a sales order, for example, you're going to apply some logic to entering that sales order that might automate things, or it might validate certain things, to actually, make it a little bit more of a smoother process. And the question, when do you use it? I guess the whens is this many whens. When can I use it? I'll just list a few ones up. One could be for approval routing. I think most of you guys might have an approval workflow sitting in there. It's a perfect example of a workflow. But it could also just be for notifications, if you want to show a message to a certain user or to a certain role when they do a certain process. That could be another use case. And then the other one we've got in there, of course, is a bit of a generic one, is automation of process. to actually sort of automate a certain process and make it into a more sort of fluent process rather than having the user going from one to the other. I guess you're sort of more in control of what the process does. Again, so there's many more scenarios that you can use it, but these are sort of the main ones. So let's have a look at what a workflow sort of record or the workflow components are, and you'll see that in my live demo that I'll be pointing them out, but it's good to sort of get into terminology right, I guess. So when I talk about states, a state is sort of the what stage of the business process is it in. So if we look at the example that we've got here as a purchase order approval in that screenshot, we can see that the states are the ones that says state 1, state 2, state 3. So these are really the stages where the workflow goes through: entering, pending approval, rejected, approved, to the stages. Then the actions is how is a process done, and then you can see that on the right side you've got all my actions. An action could be setting a field value, adding a button, returning user error. All these things are actions that you can configure in your workflow, and you'll see that as well. Then the transitions, these are all the where does the business process move to. So all the little arrows that you can see in the screenshot, these are like the transitions. So it goes from one state to the other through a transition, and you'll see how we can configure that transition on what it actually does. And then the last one is the triggers. And when we talk about a trigger in a workflow, it basically means when does it actually happen? When do you need to take the action? And on the right side, you can see we've got a few triggers where it says before record loads. That means before the record actually gets loaded, that's when we want to add a button so that when the records get loaded, we can actually see that button. So it's sort of a trigger on when that workflow actually runs. So to sort of explain this a little bit more and actually do the demo, I've got 3 use cases that I've prepared. The first 2 we'll actually do together, and then the third one will sort of review an existing workflow. So the first one is quite a simple one, where we're gonna do some field actions, where we're actually gonna disable some fields, make some fields mandatory, default some fields based on logic, and we'll just work through it, and we'll see how we can easily do that in a workflow. Then the second one is more a bit of a process, so it's sort of to automate a sales process, and the scenario that we're gonna follow down there is creating, whenever we create a sales order, we're gonna create a follow-up task for the sales rep of that sales order, and then we're gonna make it easy for the sales rep to email out a sales confirmation to the customer. And then the last one that we're gonna just have a quick review on it is just reviewing a purchase approval workflow, and basically it's the purchase order basic approval one. We're just gonna have a look at how is that built, how could you change it for your business needs, and have a look at the different transitions in the different states in that one. So this is where I guess you all been waiting for it, get the actual live demo. So what we'll do is I'll swap out of this presentation, and I will go into my NetSuite. Gabrielle, just checking if you can indeed see my NetSuite login now.
I can indeed, yes.
So then our attendees should be able to see the same thing. So I'm logged into one of our demo accounts. Ideally, if you want to create workflows, the easiest thing, I guess, is to be in an administrator role. I've got an administrator role, but you don't have to have an administrator role. You can also create a custom role and apply the workflow permissions to it, so you can actually access workflows and create workflows. But I guess as an administrator, of course, you get a bit of flexibility. You can actually do everything. But again, don't worry if you don't have full administrator. If you've got full access, you should be able to do it as well. Or if you've got any other role, then you can always ask your administrator to give you the workflow permission so you can actually create and view workflows. So the workflows, they sit under customization, and then you'll see something called workflows. That's where the list of existing workflows will sit. If I go to my list of workflows, I can see down here I've got a few workflows that are already been created. But today what we're going to do is we're going to start off from a complete new workflow. If I go to the workflows, I can see I've got something that's called down here new workflow. If I click on that, what you'll see is that will bring it up a blank new workflow. When creating a new workflow, you can either start from scratch and just start from a blank one, but you can also start from a template. So there are a few sort of templates, mostly approval ones that you can start off with: a purchase order approval one, a sales order approval one. that basically give you already a little bit of data that you can then edit and change like as you want it. In this example, we're going to do the fields one, defaulting the fields on a form. So we're just going to start from a complete blank one. So what you'll see first, of course, give it a name, your workflow. If I'm going to name it something that is relevant. So in this scenario, I'm going to say I want to default to sales order fields, because that's the scenario. We're going to take the scenario of a sales order, and we're going to apply some logic to that sales order. Then the ID, even though it's not mandatory, NetSuite will generate one. I always suggest that you do create an ID for it as well, and have it, again, something relevant. Have it always starting as a best practice, and that's with fields, with searches, with anything, workflows, to start with an underscore and then start typing. So you can't have any spaces in IDs. That's why we use underscores as a space. So it'll be default SO fields, for example. The next one, it's asking us what record tab do we want to do this under. If I try and find my sales order down here, you'll see there's nothing called sales order. What a sales order actually is, I guess it's sort of part of a bigger group, which is actually the transactions. So if I go to record tab transaction, you'll see that down below, there's something that comes up for subtypes. What that also means is that if you want to create the same workflow for a sales order and invoice, then you can do that. You can basically select multiple subtypes in this list. So if I go down to my sales order, I can just click this one, or if I would want to have it on an invoice or on a quote as well, for example, I can just hold my control key and I can do quote as well. So it's applied to do two separate transactions. You can't do that with, for example, you can't do it for customer and contact, so they're two completely different records, so you can't apply the same workflow. But with transactions, you can do it against every transaction type that you want. Description, not mandatory again, but to give it a meaningful description, add logic to sales order, for example. Add a long description. You can make it as long as you like. So I guess the business knows what this workflow is all about. The owner is going to be the person that's creating it, which is fine. If you are doing something in the backend that the user that is using the workflow might not have access to it, you can execute as an admin. That means that just this workflow will basically skip all the permissions and will basically execute it as an administrator, so that no matter who's actually using it, you won't have any permissions issue. For now, in this scenario, we don't really need that because we're just going to do some fields. Then the next one is the release status. So with release statuses, whenever you build one, definitely start off with testing. Testing means that this workflow will only run for the owner of the workflow, which is what we want, obviously, because we're testing it, we're setting it up, and making sure that it doesn't affect anybody else in the business, but just the actual owner. Other ones is released. So once you're actually happy with it and you've tested it fully, you can release it, and then it basically will get released to the whole account. And then you got two other ones, which they're slightly new from the new release. So if you've worked with workflows, they might look slightly different. Part of the new release, they've changed the data, and they've created a new one, which is called suspended. So when you put a workflow in suspended, it means that an existing, if you've got a purchase approval workflow, for example, and it's in pending approval, that will never get to the next stage. It gets suspended, so it will never actually go any further. Where not initiating, that means that the workflow will not initiate again, so it won't start a new process, but all the existing purchase orders that are following this flow, they will continue to use the workflow because they have already started. Where suspended is that the one that completely suspends it. So in our scenario, we're just testing, which is fine. It's asking us if we want to keep some instances and history. So yes, you can either say always, never, only when testing. Only when testing is probably the best scenario in this case, where you want to see the history, and of course we want to enable logging so that we can actually see if something goes wrong in our workflow. Where does it go wrong? What is it actually doing? Then the next one is the initiation. And then there's two. Today we won't be able to get to the scheduled ones, but so we're going to always pick event-based, which means that we're going to do something in the system to trigger this workflow. Where what a scheduled workflow is, that basically means that the workflow you'll be able to schedule. So if I click schedule, you see that I can actually schedule it for a certain time, certain date, until what date. So you basically, it's going to run the background. It's not going to do anything with the user. Where event-based, we've actually got triggers on when should this one run. So in these scenarios, we're just going to pick event-based. So then it's asking us the event definition. When should it actually happen, this workflow? In this scenario, the scenario is that we just want to do it when we create a new sales order. So when I say I want to create a new sales order, the workflow should run. That means that really definitely it should run on create. And on view or update, it shouldn't really run because it's really only when we want to create a new sales order, when we're looking. So when we're viewing a sales or when we're editing a sales order, we don't want this workflow to run. So we're not going to take that one. So you can take both, and that's in the next scenario. We're actually going to do that. With trigger type, if you don't really know the trigger type, if it's not really before or before record load, before record submit, or after record submit, just leave it all, and you'll see that when we do our actions, you actually be able to select the trigger type as well. If it is a workflow that should only run after you submitted the record and then the workflow should kick off, you can select it here already. Otherwise, if you don't know, just leave it as all, and you'll see we can do it in the actions. Down here under the context, what you'll see under the condition, you can see for the whole workflow, you can already apply a condition to that. One of the conditions could be is that you want to make it role specific. So if I click on that little arrow, it will give me here my conditions, and it will basically ask me, okay, what's the condition? So let's say that my condition is I want to only have it running for administrators. If I go to user role, the user role fields, I can say any of, and then down here in selection, I can either type it in or use the list. I just know it's administrators. I'm just going to type it in. So I'm saying administrator and add and save. So what you'll see now is down here, it says this workflow will only run when the user role is equals administrator. So any other role, it won't run. Of course, again, remember we put it here on testing. So even if you're another administrator, and you're not this person, this workflow is not going to run. Once it's released, that's when it will only run for the administrator role and not for any other roles. That's the multi-select, so obviously you can do it for one or more roles if you would like to. So let's go and click save. Once we save it, that's when actually it will bring up our, I guess, empty workflow always with one state. So obviously a workflow needs to have always one state. So as we said, a state is sort of the one that sort of moves it from one business process to the next. In our scenario, if we really just want to default some fields or set some fields or disable some fields, that all can happen in one state. So you don't really need to have multiple states for that. That can all happen in that first state down here. So in this scenario, we're not actually going to create new states. We're not going to worry about it because really we all want it to happen at the same time. So the first one what we're going to do is we're going to disable a field. So if I click on the state, so down here I can't add any new actions. The only thing I can do is I can see my transactions. So if you want to add an action to a certain state, you click on the state, and then down below we can see we can add a new action down here. If I click on my new action, it's asking me, okay, what type of action do you actually want to add? Again, we won't be able to cover all of them, so I'll just use a few in these demo scenarios so you can actually see a few ones in action. So the one that we're looking for is we want to make a field disabled. So if we want to make the field disabled, what we actually want to do is we want to change the display type of that field. So you see there's nothing called set disabled, but there's something called down here set field display type. So a display type could be, you want to actually show the field, you want to hide the field, you want to make it disabled. So that would all be display types. So in that scenario, we're going to go to set field display type. And then it will ask me when, so it's part of state one, which is great. The ID down here, that's okay. You can leave that. You don't have to give it an ID. It will automatically generate. And then it's got these triggers. So I've talked these triggers in the slide as well. I showed you that. That's important. So it's asking me to trigger when should this get triggered. So when I look at what the options are, there's quite a few options. In this scenario, it says before record load. So before record load would mean that it would always happen whenever you bring up a new sales order, it will trigger this action straight away. So in our scenario, if we do want to have a field disabled from the start, then we can use that one. If we want to disable certain fields based on some logic, for example, if it's a certain customer or if it's a certain department or whatever, then I guess we would have to do it after field edit, because that would mean that after somebody changes the customer, that's when the action should trigger. For now, we're just going to do a full record load so that it does it on the whole record. And down here, we're going to say our field that we want to select is, for example, the sales rep. So we want to have the sales rep to be a disabled field. And on here, we can see a display type. We can either have it as normal, which is the default. We can have it disabled, which makes it sort of grayed out. You can have it inline, which basically means you can't change it and it's just text, and then hidden, of course, it's just going to hide the field completely. So we're going to do disabled in this scenario, and we're going to click save. Once I save this one, this workflow now really is because it's testing, it's active. This action should actually trigger. So let's try that one. So if we go down here, and if I go to open up a new sales order in a new tab, what we'll see hopefully is that when we run this new sales order, that our sales rep field in this scenario will be disabled. And there you go. I guess a lot of you guys are probably thinking, oh, I could have easily done that on the form. I could have customized the form, changed the field, and made it disabled. And that's true. So that's probably not actually the best example, because you really could have done that easily with just disabling it on the form. What you can't do on the form is, of course, build some logic around that. That's what I've been talking, because that's what the workflow is all about. So if you want to edit an action, you just hover over the action down here and you click on the little pencil, and that will open up the action again that we worked on. So if I have a look at the action, if I want to build some logic, and let's say that we've got a company called BBM company, and the BBM company, we should not be able to change the sales rep whenever that company is selected. What we'll have to do is we'll have to say, okay, after we edit a field, that's when we want to trigger this action. So I'm going to go after field edit, and then down here, it's asking me what field should this trigger on. So after what field should this action run? So in our scenario, if we're doing it based on a customer, then we're going to pick the customer fields out of this list. So pick customer. So basically what we're saying here is that after field edit, after you edit the customer field, then do this action. So of course now it will always do it because I haven't put a condition. But if I on the right side, you can see you can actually add a condition to that, which we're going to do now. So if I click open this little arrow again, it will give me that same condition screen that we've seen earlier in our workflow. And we're actually going to say, okay, down here, we want to say the customer. So when the customer is equal any of our BBM company, that's when we actually want to trigger this action. So the action will get triggered after you change the customer, and when the customer, so it checks it after, of course, when the customer is BBM company, then set the sales rep to disabled. So let's try that. Let's click save. And let's go back to our sales order and just refresh this one. When we refresh it, we're not expecting to be the sales rep to be disabled. Indeed, it's not. And I'll try it first with a different customer. So let's go to Blue Pumpkin. If I type in Blue Pumpkin, this criteria should not be met. So I'm not expecting the sales rep field to get disabled, and indeed I can still actually change it. Now, if I do select my BBM company, and if I click on this one, and there we go. We can see that the sales rep is myself, but that's disabled. I can't actually change it. That's because after field edit, it checked the condition, BBM company, and it made sure that yes, indeed, the field down there is actually disabled. So that's a good way to sort of build logic into your entering your screen, entering your sales order, without really having to do much. I've just had to configure literally one action with one condition and one state. So it's a very simple, a simple workflow. The other thing that you can add actions to this, so you don't have to stop at one action. If you want to do more actions, then you obviously can. So if I again add a new action, and let's say that the new action is that I want to make a certain field mandatory based on a certain criteria. So again, I'm going to do down here. I can see there's an action called set field mandatory, which I'm going to click on. It's going to give me the same screen. It's going to ask me, okay, when should this get triggered? So this get triggered before record loads. It always does it. Or do you want to have it after field edit? So this now I want to have it after field edit. And again, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to do based on the category of the customer. So if I go to my customer, so it will still be the customer fields, because once I change the customer, that's when it should check my logic if that customer is a certain category. My field down there, I'm going to say that can be the department, for example, should be mandatory. So I'm selecting my field that I want to make mandatory, and I'm going to click this little tick box of to be mandatory. Then in my condition down here, when I open this one up, when I want to have the customer category, I'm really looking for the category within the customer records. If I'm doing that, I won't find the category. So the customer category, that doesn't exist in this list. If I look for a customer priority, customer message, there's no customer category. If I look for category, again, there's nothing down here. That's because the category actually sits within the customer record. So what you need to do first is you need to get the record customer, and then within the customer record, that's where we have to find the category. And there it is. And we're going to say any of customer category, we're going to pick our, I know it's a corporation, so anything, if it's a corporation, we actually want to have this department field mandatory. So let's save that one. And every time that you want to retest a workflow, make sure that you reload your record. If I would try it now, you'll see it won't actually work because it doesn't know yet that the workflow has been updated. So refresh the whole page. Yes, we want to reload that. And let's try that one again. So if I now, I know BBM company is a corporation. So if I type in BBM company, what I'll see, I'm expecting two things. The sales rep field should get disabled, and there we go. My department field is also now made mandatory. So I actually have to enter something in for this customer. Now, for this customer, for this type of customer, for corporation, if that's always going to be wholesale, for example, wholesale, that's something that we can obviously default so that the customer doesn't, the user doesn't have to remember that. If it's always the same based on the customer category, then we can just set that straight away. So let's do that in our final one. In the action down here, we're going to add another action, and now we're going to use something that's called to default the value. We're going to use a field that's called set field value. So we're going to set a certain value on a certain field. And down here, again, it's going to trigger on when do you want to trigger it. The same thing, we want to do it after we edit a field. And again, we want to do it after our customer editing the field. So customer, the field that we want to default is our department field. And the value that we want to set, you can either do it based on some dynamics, but now we'll just make it easy. We're going to make a static field, a static value, which means that we're going to pick in the workflow what it should be. So we set that should always be wholesale. So that should be wholesale. And again, if we leave it like this without a condition, it means that it will always default it to wholesale, which isn't really the case. We want our condition. We only want to do it for corporations that it actually sets it to that. So again, we're going to use the same condition. Customer category is corporation. Done. Add, save, and then don't forget to save this one as well. And there you go. That's added to here. So we've got a disable, a mandatory, and a set field value. If I go back to my sales order, I refresh it, and let's try that one again. We're entering our BBM company. And there you go. The department gets defaulted straight away based on, because this is a corporation. So I'll show you that as well, just so you understand where that category actually sits. So the category field on the customers is the default NetSuite field. And you can see down here, category is corporation. So based on that logic, it knew that it could default to the department based on wholesale. So I didn't have to do anything. I can't change the sales rep. That's one of the things we did, and I can't actually change that. So it's a very simple workflow. It doesn't take much time to actually build something like that, but it might already make your entering of, for example, sales order a lot easier because things gets defaulted, and your reporting will be a lot more accurate because you're more in control of what people select. I could also, of course, make this department one disabled, so that nobody can actually change it after it's been set. So we can do a lot more than that. What you can now also do in the new release, something that you can't do with customizing the form. If I want to make a certain field mandatory on the line levels, when I talk about line level fields, they're down here. When you normally customize a form, you can't actually say what's mandatory, what's not. This is just systematically mandatory. What you can do now with workflows, if I go to set field mandatory, and I want to just do it for all sales orders before I can load. Down here, you can see that you can choose between the body or a sublist. So the body fields, these are all the fields that are down here. So they're all in the main section, or they're down here as well. But all the item fields, all the sublist lines would be those ones. If we want to make anything mandatory on that level, we can say sublist items, and we can pick down here a field on the line. So for example, if you always want to have a description of a line, so the description field is the field down here, the sales description. If you always want to have that filled in, so you want to have it mandatory, you can do that now by just creating a workflow. Before I can load item description line, I save that one, and you'll see if I now refresh it so no conditions, so it means that I should always do it on a sales order. And what you'll see now is that suddenly this description field on the line level, so for every line, you will have to have a description. So that's something that you couldn't do in the previous release, but now they're slowly opening up workflows to be able to also have them managed on the line level, which is great for these type of simple things where you want to make things mandatory or set certain defaults for all the lines, and you can easily do that with a workflow. So that was my first scenario. One state, a few actions. Most of them were after field edit, and the last one we wanted to do it for everything. So you'll see that sits under here under before rec load. So once I'm happy with this workflow, what I could do now, if I click on workflow down here, so this is my state preferences, this is my workflow preferences. If I click on the little pencil on the workflow, and we'll go back to our initial screen when we created it, that's where now I can change the release status and say, yeah, actually now I do want to release this one, so that it actually gets released when it gets released to all, in this scenario, to all my administrators within the company, which we're not going to do because we're testing anyway. So that was the first sort of scenario, quite simple, but hopefully sort of give you a little bit of an insight on how to use it to sort of default fields and change fields behaviors. The next one is a bit more of a process. So what we want to do with the next one, again, we're going to go to the same screen, we're going to go to workflows, and we're going to click on new workflow. So what we want to do here is we actually want to build a process where so a user will enter the sales order, and when the sales order gets created, that's when we want to have an automatic task created for the sales rep. And then the sales rep will be able to view that task, and his task is to just review the sales order, check if everything is okay, and send out the sales confirmation to the customer. So this one we're going to call follow up sales process. Again, we're going to give it an ID that makes sense. Follow up on sales order, for example. Record type, again, it's going to be the same. It's going to be transaction, and it's going to be sales order. We're going to be testing it. That's fine. And now we're going to do two things in this workflow. So we're going to do something on create. So whenever you create a sales order, we want it to be sending out, creating that task to notify the sales rep to actually do something with it. And then afterwards, we're also going to create something that once you view the sales order, you can easily send out a sales confirmation in a almost a one button tap a click. So when I'm saying these things, it basically means that I want to have it on both, because I want to have something to happen on create, and we're also going to do something on viewer updates. So in this scenario, we want to use those two. The trigger type, again, it's going to be on different trigger types. So if that's the case, again, all, and you'll see we'll just define that on our actions on when we actually want to do that one. Conditions, there's no condition in this scenario. We're just going to do it all. We do want to enable the logging, because I will show you in this scenario the logging, how you can see that. So we'll enable that one, and there we go, we'll save it. And again, we'll go back to our blank canvas, our blank one. So this one, we are going to have different processes, because first we're going to do something, and then we're going to do the sales confirmation. We're going to split it up. So to start off with, we're just going to use one state, just do our first thing. So this state, let's rename it and actually give it a name. So you can either call it state one and whatever, or just call it one. And that can be create follow-up task. That's it. That's the only thing it's going to do. Perfect. I'm going to save that one, and I've got my first name with the correct name. Same thing. I'm going to click on my state, and I'm going to click on new action. So when I say I want to create a task, A task in NetSuite is another record. So you'll see again, there's no action called create new task, but there is something that is called create records. So when it says create record, you can basically create any record you like. It could be a task, could be an event, it could be contact, it could be anything you like. In this scenario, we want to create a task. So if I click on create records, it will ask me again for should it get triggered on. So where should it get triggered on? If you are creating a record, if you are sending an email, if you're doing any of that, the best thing to do that is that on after record submit. What that means, so the difference between before and after means that if you do before submit, before it gets sent to the NetSuite database in the background, that's when it will run. So it won't actually, for example, with a transaction, it won't have a transaction ID yet. It won't have a sales order number yet, because it's basically the data that sits there and gets pushed to the database. Once it gets into the database, that's when it actually gets a document number. So if you want to have it fully saved, fully ready, you should do it on after record submit, because then it means that it's gone in, the record has been created, and then your action flows. So that's our scenario. We want to actually have it after record submit. Now, on our workflow, we said we want to have it running on create and on view and on update. So basically, we'll always run on any record. So it's very important now that we actually specify down here, when do we want this to happen? So in our previous workflow, we didn't use these event tabs down here because we just set it on create on our workflow. If you've got a create, an edit, and a create, make sure that you, for every action you do, you think about, okay, when should this happen? So in this scenario, we only want to have it happening on creating a new workflow, creating a new sales order. Then I'm going to select create down here. So I'm saying my event type is create. And so it's after the record gets created, this action will basically run, which is what we want. Then in my record type, it's going to ask me what type of records we want to create after record submit. Well, in this scenario, we want to have a task. And of course, if I just do a task, that's not really going to help because it doesn't know who to assign it to and who to do anything with. So we're going to down here where it says fields, we can now pick fields of that task to basically set default. So first of all, we probably want to assign it to the sales rep. So I'm going to say assigned, and down here, you can either select something, so you can actually type somebody in, but that means that will always go to the same one. Or you can use this value field, which basically, if you click on that, it will give you options of fields on the sales order that you can use. So what we want to do is we want to use the sales rep on the sales order to be assigned to the task. So we're going to pick sales rep. Then we probably want to give the task a title. So the title, let's say that we want to have it always the same title, so we can just type that in, follow up on sales order. Of course, if I just do those two, it will get created fine and that will all work, but the sales rep won't know what customer, what's the transaction, and it won't know anything. So what we're going to do, we're also going to, there's some fields, there's a field called company on the task, and the company is going to be the customer of the sales rep. And there's also a field called transaction, and the transaction on the task is going to be, you would think that it would be down here somewhere sales order, and if you pick sales order, you'll see that won't actually work. Because what we're looking at here, we're looking at the fields on the sales order. What we really want is we want the sales order record itself. So if you want the actual sales order record itself, because this workflow is running on a transaction, what you'll see if I look on a selection, there's something called current records. So really what we're saying here is that we don't want a field on the sales order, we just want the record that this workflow is running on. We want to have that linked to the transaction field of the task. Add this one down here, and then you can add other ones. You can have a message in there where you can write something in, which we're not going to do for now. But what another example could be there's something called is it called notifying? It's called email SNE. So yes, we do want to have that one, and that's a tick box. Yes, no. So we're going to tick that one. So that means that NetSuite is going to automatically send out an email to the person assigned saying like, hey, you've got a new task, follow up on sales order for this company with this transaction. So that looks perfect to me. We've got all of these ones, and there's no condition because we want to do it for all new sales orders that we create. So we're going to click save. And before we go any further, let's go and test that one with a new sales order. So again, make sure we refresh our sales order and start off with a completely new sales order, and we're going to do it again for our BBM company. BBM company, clicking on that one, entering the PO number, and what this person wants to order. They want to order 1205. I know my item codes in this example. Go to some sort of mounting, a mounting board. They want to have 5 of those ones. Add. That's all I need to do. $30, perfect. So now when I click save, this is when it should create a sales order, and in the background it should also create that task. As we said, we're creating sales order. We also want to actually create a task record that is linked to the sales order. So once the sales order is saved, we won't be able to see anything right now, but once the sales order is saved, we should see under, so what we're expecting now is that when we go under communication and we go under activities, that there is a task for following up sales order for Murph, which is the one I'm logged in with, and is the sales rep of the sales rep. And when I click on this one, on that task, what we'll be able to see is that under related records, it correctly linked it to the company and to the transaction. So that sales rep knows which sales order he actually needs to follow upon. So if you want to see that in a sort of, in the flow and how that sort of worked, if you look under system information of a record that has a workflow against it, you'll see there's something called workflow history. So the workflow history that shows you when the workflow gets triggered and what state does it get stuck or not. So you can see our defaulting of fields. It did that one, and it's also finished that one. Then it went into our creation of our first one. And if I click on log, I can actually see what did this actually do. So you can see down here, after submit, it created a record, and it created a record with all these with all these values, which is correct. If for some reason it didn't run, there will be 2 things. Either you get an error saying that it won't work for whatever reason, or it might be because your condition is not met, and it will skip it completely. So what you can do is you can say, I want to show my rejected actions and transactions, which will mean is that if, for example, if I edit it, it's not going to do this again. It will skip it. Or if your condition is not met, it will skip it, and then you can show the rejected actions or transitions, and you'll see which ones that it actually didn't do, and it will say then here why it actually didn't do it, because probably the criteria was not met, or whatever the case might be. That's a good way to sort of look at your workflow history and see what workflow is actually doing what. So now the sales rep has gotten this task, which is great. The only thing I guess with that one is that, yeah, he looks at the task, goes to the sales order, and then to send out, so he would review it, and then needs to send out a sales order confirmation, which he can do quite easily by going to down here, clicking on I want to create a new email. Then he would have to click on the message and type in a message or select a template. I guess you see what I'm getting at. If this is all really exactly the same, include it as a PDF. If these are all the steps are all exactly the same, it would be nice to just get it all automated so that one click of a button could actually do that. And that's what we're going to do now. So you'll see you've got a few buttons down here. So what we basically want to create another button that comes down here that says send confirmation. And when we click on that button, that will automatically send out the confirmation out. So let's go back to our workflow. If you're doing something like this where you have to click on a button for something else to happen, you're going to need more than one state, because it's going to have to go from one to the next to be able to do something. So let's start off with adding a new state to this one. And we're adding a new state. And in this state, we're calling this one the send sales order confirmation. And it's going to be 2 send sales confirmation, saving that one. And there you go, we got a second state. Now, with the second state, you can see it's not connected, so it's never going to get to the state at this stage. So we're going to have to somehow connect it. First of all, you have to think about what should be the trigger between these 2 states. So we said if we want to create, we want to have clicking on a button to then going to the send sales order confirmation. Well, then we're going to obviously have to create a button first. So we go to our first state and we're going to add a new action. And the new action, there's something called add button. So click on adding a button. We can give that button a name, so that will be send sales order confirmation. and it will ask us when do you want to do it. So we want to have it on before record load, and it's also going to ask you down here on what type. So we don't want to have it on creation. We don't want to have when you edit it. We only want to see it when we're actually viewing the sales order. So we just pick view only. Perfect. And that's really the only thing we want. So we want to have it on before record loads. So basically, when the record loads, it's going to show it. Perfect. So now they're still not connected, these two. What you can do is you can see if you hover over this, you've got this little hand that basically you can hold on to, and you can create a little arrow to whatever state you want it to go. So we want it to go to this state. So we've just created a transition from one state to the next. Now we haven't actually defined when it's actually going to do. So yes, we've created a button. Yes, we created a transition, but we haven't actually created when it should actually get triggered. So when we click on this little arrow, what we can do down here, you can see transition on, condition, there's nothing. So we're going to edit this little arrow. We're going to say when should this happen. So there's different things that can happen transition on. You can say after something gets submitted, then it should go. You can do it. It's loads of different things. We're not going to use this transition on because we actually want to do it on a button execution. So if you want to do that, on the right side, you'll see there's something called execute on button. So send sales confirmation, that's the button that we've created, and I click save. So basically what we've set down here is that to go from this state to this state, we only want to do it when they click the send sales order confirmation. So which is great. So now if you would click the button, it will go to this state, and the state at the moment is empty. So we have to fill it up and actually say what should happen in this state. So I'm going to add a new action, and I'm going to say I want to send out an email. Send out an email in this scenario, and the trigger on again in this scenario. You could think, oh, it's after record submit, which is not going to work in this scenario, because really what we want to do in here is that once it gets into the state, so when we click the button, it goes into the state. That's when we want to trigger it. So that will be entry. So once you enter the state, then do my action. So if you're doing something like that, where you're clicking a button to do something, then just put it onto entry so that whenever it gets into it, it will actually do it. So we're doing entry, which is perfect. And then it will ask us, okay, who should be the sender? You can either pick somebody or you can make it dynamic. So we're going to say, oh, we want to have it from the sales rep. And then down here, you can say, who should it go to? You can select somebody, or again, you can pick a field from the sales order, which in this scenario is going to be the customer. You can add a BCC to it if you like. You can select a template, or you can add a custom one. Again, easy to select a template. I've already set up a template, which is called sales order confirmation. Here we go, selecting that template. And of course, I want to include a transaction in here as well. So I want to include it as a PDF. Save. So now this section is just send email. Nothing will really, well, it will send the email, but I guess the main thing is that you'll just get rediverted to the transaction, and that's fine if that's the case. What you can also do is you can make it more into a process where if he sends the email, then afterwards he needs to go back to his tasks to go to the next one, then you can do that as well. So if I go to new action, we're going to add one more action to this one, and we're going to say something that's called go to page. Go to page means is that after this action happens, it will go to another page. So if I even do it on entry, because I want to do an entry, and there's something called my tasks to complete. So I want to have them to go to a saved search I've created, which is called my task to complete results. Save on that one. Basically what we said in the state, we said send an email to the customer and then redirect the user to something that is called a saved search, is called my task to complete. So let's have a look at that now. So if I refresh my page, obviously, to be able to get that workflow to get refreshed, what I'm expecting to see is indeed my send sales order confirmation button, which is great. So when I click this button, I'm expecting that the email gets sent and I'm redirected to my task page. So let's try that. Click on send sales order confirmation. In the background, it will be sending the email. Once the email is sent, I will be taken to my task to complete result. There you go. And there you go. I can see that today, on the 15th of the 5th, I've got a follow-up sales order for this company, which now by one click on the button, I've completed. So actually, I can complete this task by just using the standard mark complete option in here, and that task has been completed. To see if that actually worked as well, obviously we can go back to our sales order and have a look in here on that sales order, I can see down here in my, I can see two things. In my system information workflow history, I'll be able to follow up on what's actually happened, send sales information. I can see my log, so I could see it this way and see, I've sent an email to this, from this to this. Or of course, an easier way would be going to my communication of my sales order, and I can see down here, we've got one email sitting here from the sales rep to the company with the template with the thing attached. So without him actually having to go to email, just by clicking on the button, it actually went to it straight away. So that's sort of a more process-based workflow where it goes from one stage to the next by clicking on a button, and we sort of made a little sales process that might be relevant to your business, might not be, but it's sort of an easy way to look at what can I do with a process. Looking at the time, I don't think I'll have much time to cover out the third scenario, but the third scenario was really just, I think you've probably got all the workflow in your account. So what I want to do with that one is just have a look and know your workflows. I've got one that is called basic purchase approval. If I click on that one, that's the one that's probably been set up by NetSuite, or this is one created from a template. What you can see down here, that has a lot more conditions and all that sort of thing. So what a good test is always to do is have a look at one of these ones and have a look at the states, have a look at if you understand the different actions, have a look at the transitions. This one executes on a button. So when you click submit approval, it goes to the next button and the next state. So it's all really the same concept. If you want to, I guess, yeah, practice, have a look at one of these workflows and have a look if you can understand what they do by just clicking on them, clicking on different states, clicking on different conditions, and seeing what is actually get triggered, and when does it get triggered. And if you've got an issue with one of the workflows, try and sort of troubleshoot based on, I guess, what you've learned today of these different transitions, and see if you can work out what is actually where and what's actually going wrong. So I think that was my bit of things. I might hand it over back to Gabrielle to see if there's any questions, because I think we should have some time as well to still answer some questions as well.
Lovely, thank you so much, Brett. That was amazing. I think most of the questions you've answered as you've gone along. We do have one question here. Can you trigger a workflow by sending an email attachment with a keyword certificate to a customer?
No, it's unfortunate that wouldn't be a triggered event indeed. Like the workflow really needs to get triggered from within NetSuite, where if you would send an email and then you're waiting for that email to be received, I mean, the email's got kind of get received in NetSuite in that sense, so that's not indeed a workflow trigger.
Right, okay. So at the moment we don't have any further questions. Just wondering if there is anyone who does have a question while we have Brett here on the line. Please just type that in for us. And otherwise, just while we're waiting, just a reminder, so this is one in a series. So we have looked at saved searches, we've looked at setting up dashboards, we've now had a thorough basic training in workflows, and coming up in June we're going to look at an introduction to different or the sort of basic marketing functionalities that are within that are within NetSuite. So please also, if you have any topics that you think would make a good Back to Basics webinar, please do send those in to us as well. We're always looking at new sort of topics that would be inspiring as well for a large audience. So please do send those in to us. Now we do have a question here for you, a couple of questions coming in now. So firstly, yes, we will have a link to the video recording. I'll be sending everyone who's registered and yeah, everyone who's registered will receive a copy of this webinar. Also, you can pop over to the events tab via our website, and there's a list of all of the past training webinars that you can access as well. So on to the questions. How is the field and workflow being used compared to custom fields?
Sorry, say that question again.
Oh, sorry. How is the field in workflows being used compared to custom fields?
Are we talking about these fields down here that you can set up in a workflow? if that's the case, if you're talking about these fields, so these fields are sort of workflow fields, and they can only be accessed from within the workflow. So they're not fields that you create on a transaction or on a record. They're really just fields that you work with. You kind of store a temporary value in, for example, and then you can use it within your workflow. That field is not really going to be a field on your record. It's just something that gets used in the background. I'm hoping that answered that.
Wonderful. Cool. Thank you. So on a sales order workflow, can we grey out the sales rep field once the sales order is saved? If I don't select a specific customer under conditions, will it be applicable for all customers?
Yeah, so you can do that. So if that's your scenario, you want to have it indeed once it's created, then really what you're looking at, when somebody edits the sales order, that's when you want to lock it. So your workflow should be running on view on edit, and you want to just add a condition, add an action that says set field display type to disabled. So that means on creation you'll be able to select whoever you want, but once it's created, it's saved, and somebody tries to edit it, it'll be grayed out for the user, so they can't actually change that sales rep field anymore.
Okay, wonderful. So I think at this point in time, then that's the last of the questions. So unless anything comes in the next sort of 30 seconds, thank you so much, Brett. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. So just another reminder, you will get a copy of the presentation today. And if you wanted to get a copy of the actual slides, we can send those out to you as well. Just send me an email, and those details will be in the email that that gets sent out to you tomorrow. So wonderful. Have a lovely, lovely day, everybody. And as you all know, we the Liberate IT team, we all work remotely as we use a cloud system. So goodbye from the currently sunny Whangaparaoa Peninsula. And Brett, where are you farewelling us from?
Very, very rainy South Island.
Right. Cool. Okay, everyone. We'll see you back here next month. Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
We hope this video gave you the information you were after. If you have any further questions, get in touch with us using the links in the description. At Liberate IT, we can provide free consulting to understand your business system requirements, understand your company growth plans, and provide free NetSuite demonstrations. For more information, visit our website.